4 words, attributed to sources speaking to a Spanish newspaper, are currently circulating throughout the Catholic world. This is not an official statement. There is no press release. There is no signature attached to it. On the surface, it looks like a minor detail, almost a footnote to a story that had already seemed settled. And yet that detail, if accurate, shifts the entire center of gravity of everything that has happened around the liturgy in recent months, and it changes the meaning of a sentence that had already been spoken publicly weeks earlier. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly why. And I will leave you with 3 specific points to watch in the coming weeks. Points that will tell you whether this reconstruction of events actually holds up or not. Return first to January 7th of this year. The first extraordinary consistory of the new pontificate was underway at the Vatican. Approximately 170 cardinals from around the world were expected to attend. 4 subjects were scheduled for discussion: evangelization, reform of the Curia, synodality, and the liturgy. Due to time constraints, 2 of those 4 points were ultimately left unaddressed, and the liturgy specifically was among them. Officially, the Mass was not actually on the agenda that day. And yet a text was distributed to the cardinals anyway. It was handed out by Cardinal Arthur Roche, prefect of the Dicastery for Divine Worship. It was a short document, roughly a page and a half in length. Not an encyclical. Not a formal decree, a brief memorandum, the kind of document no one would ordinarily expect to leave any lasting mark on history. And yet today, this single sheet of paper sits at the center of everything currently unfolding in this controversy. It is worth examining exactly what it says. The text firmly defends the liturgical reform that followed the Second Vatican Council and justifies the restrictions imposed on celebrations according to the older Missal. It contains a central image, one that has stayed fixed in the memory of everyone who has read it. Tradition, the text argues, is a living river. It is not, according to this framing, a frozen preservation of past forms, but a living and evolving practice. And the Reformed rite, the text specifies, is fully consistent with authentic tradition understood in that dynamic sense. This is a precise thesis, and it must be said that it has serious defenders within Catholic theology. Those who hold this position point out that the liturgy has always developed across the centuries, and that freezing it in a single fixed form would itself be unnatural, working against the very organic character liturgical development has always had. In summary, what we had at that consistory was a document from the prefect of the Dicastery for Liturgy, laying out the position of his own office. Controversial, like everything else surrounding this subject, but entirely within the bounds of his own institutional mandate. Now move forward to August 2nd. The Spanish newspaper La Razón published a reconstruction of events that overturns how that same January document has been understood ever since. According to the newspaper's reporting, this text was not Cardinal Roche's own initiative. It was drafted, according to this account, at the explicit request of the Pope himself. And that is not all. According to this same reconstruction, Leo XIV personally reviewed the text before it was handed to the cardinals. And this is where the 4-word phrase enters the story, attributed to Vatican sources, and it has now traveled around the entire Catholic world. He changed nothing. The newspaper adds a further detail concerning the purpose behind this distribution. It was intended, according to the report, to clarify the new Pope's position on this specific question in front of the assembled cardinals. A moment of caution is necessary here, because precision matters enormously in a story like this one. What we are dealing with is a journalistic reconstruction based on anonymous sources, not a published document or an official statement from the Vatican. Rome has not confirmed this account. As of this recording, no signed document exists that formally attributes this text to the Pope's own will. This needs to be kept clearly in mind throughout everything that follows. In fact, some observers have already criticized this specific journalistic approach on principle. Publicly attributing to a pope a decision he has not personally and formally communicated, these critics argue, effectively removes from him a space that belongs properly and exclusively to him. This is a serious objection and deserves to be noted here honestly. Because even if this particular reconstruction eventually proves inaccurate in its details, the underlying harm would already exist regardless, since words and intentions would have been attributed to the Pope that he himself never actually stated. That said, it is not difficult to understand why this specific piece of reporting has generated the impact it has, because it directly addresses a question that had remained genuinely unresolved for weeks. You will recall that a few days earlier, Cardinal Roche stated publicly that the Pope would not modify the existing restrictions, a prediction he presented with the tone of settled certainty. And you will recall the specific response that came from the Archbishop of San Francisco, recently appointed to the Church's Supreme Tribunal. I don't know how well he actually knows the mind of the Holy Father. That sentence left open the real possibility that Roche was interpreting the Pope's intentions incorrectly, that the Pope might genuinely have something different in mind. And a great many people, hoping for exactly that outcome, held on to that specific possibility. The Spanish reconstruction, if it is accurate, closes that door definitively. There would no longer be any meaningful distance between the prefect and the Pope, since the text itself would have been requested and reviewed by the Pope personally. This is precisely why 2 words reported in a newspaper carry more weight than 10 official press releases combined. This reconstruction does not establish any new rule on its own. What it does is fundamentally alter the interpretation of everything that has already happened up to this point. There is also a specific detail that many observers have noticed and that deserves to be highlighted clearly. The liturgy on that specific day in January had officially been excluded from the topics under discussion due to a simple lack of available time. And yet a text specifically concerning the liturgy still made its way into the hands of the assembled cardinals regardless. It was distributed to them without any accompanying discussion, and it addressed a subject that, officially speaking, was not even on that day's agenda in the first place. On the very same day the La Razón reconstruction was published, 2 additional developments emerged independently. Neither constitutes a direct response to the January document itself, but their timing, arriving on the exact same day as the newspaper's report, has caught the attention of virtually everyone following this story closely. The first comes from Cardinal Robert Serra, who spoke to an Italian newspaper on August 2nd. His diagnosis of the current state of the Church is severe, delivered with the kind of directness that has characterized his public interventions for years. The Church, at least in the West, he says, is passing through a period of great difficulty, verging on genuine confusion across doctrinal, moral, and disciplinary matters simultaneously. He reserves even stronger language, specifically for the question of the liturgy. He describes as tragedies, even as genuine sins, the fact that something resembling a war is currently underway, and that violent conflicts are raging within the Church over this specific subject. Then comes the central sentence, the one that alone would justify this entire video's existence. No one, Sarah states, has authority over the rights that flow from the Church's own centuries-long history, and he adds a further and equally forceful clarification. Rights cannot be arbitrarily abolished, and no one can simply declare from one day to the next that a rite no longer exists. His concrete proposal is explicit and unambiguous. Return to Summorum Pontificum, the document issued by Benedict XVI that authorized both liturgical forms simultaneously, leaving the faithful themselves free to choose between them according to their own genuine spiritual needs. It must be said honestly and in full fairness that Serra does not simply align himself entirely with one side of this dispute without qualification. He explicitly acknowledges that certain excesses among some defenders of the older liturgical form can be partly explained, though not excused, by the widespread liturgical abuses occurring elsewhere in the Reformed Rite, abuses that have gone largely unaddressed by the very authorities now insisting on strict uniformity around the newer form. The second voice comes from Ireland, where Bishop Athanasius Schneider is currently preaching following a recent trip through Africa. In his homily delivered on August 2nd in Limerick, he stated that preserving the precious treasure of the traditional liturgy is an integral part of preserving the deposit of the faith itself, treating the two as inseparable from one another rather than as separate and potentially competing concerns. He added a historical warning of considerable weight. History has demonstrated 1,000 times over, he said, that nothing is more dangerous for a religion than interference with its own liturgy. From that kind of interference, he continued, discontent is born, along with disorder and division. He then recalled an old and simple rule that had guided the Church across many previous centuries of her own liturgical development. The ancient was preserved. Novelty was treated with suspicion and rejected unless it could demonstrate genuine organic continuity with what had come before it. Placed side by side, these three elements together tell the story of a single, remarkably eventful day. On one side, a journalistic reconstruction reaching all the way to the very top of the Church's governing structure, suggesting that Leo XIV himself personally authorized and reviewed the January document defending the current restrictions. On the other side, two senior and internationally respected churchmen speaking independently of one another and without any apparent coordination, both pushing back forcefully against the substance of that same document on the very same day it became the subject of public reconstruction. So rather than drawing hasty conclusions that no one can currently state with genuine certainty, here are three specific and concrete points worth watching closely in the weeks immediately ahead. Points that will actually help determine which version of this story eventually proves to be the accurate one. First, will the Vatican explicitly deny the Spanish Reconstruction? If it does not, silence itself becomes a form of information in this specific context. A newspaper report attributing personal authorship of a controversial internal document to the reigning pope is precisely the kind of claim that a functioning press office would ordinarily be expected to correct swiftly and clearly, if that claim were in fact false. The absence of any formal denial, sustained across a period of days or weeks, would itself begin to function as a kind of tacit confirmation, even without an explicit statement ever being issued. Second, the question of whether the January 7th text will ever be published in full and in an official capacity, or whether it will instead remain permanently what it currently is, a document handed directly to individual cardinals in the room that day, with no formal registration in the official record of Vatican communications. A text that circulates only informally, that is confirmed only through anonymous sourcing rather than published openly under an official seal, occupies a genuinely ambiguous position within the Church's own governing structure. It carries real practical weight, since it clearly shaped what Cardinal Roche subsequently told the tablet with such apparent confidence. But it lacks the kind of formal, citable authority that would allow it to be properly weighed, examined, and responded to by theologians, canonists, and bishops working through the Church's normal channels for addressing exactly this kind of dispute. Third, will other cardinals speak publicly in the days immediately following this reconstruction, and in what specific tone will they choose to do so? This third point may in fact be the single most reliable indicator available for determining whether this entire matter is genuinely closed, exactly as the four-word phrase reported by La Razón would suggest, or whether it in fact remains considerably more open and contested than that phrase implies. If Cardinal Sarah and Bishop Schneider turn out to be isolated voices, offering commentary that other cardinals quietly decline to echo or reinforce in the weeks that follow, that specific pattern would suggest the La Razón reconstruction has accurately captured where this particular matter currently and definitively stands. But if additional cardinals, bishops, and canonists continue coming forward in the days ahead, whether to reinforce Sarah and Schneider's specific concerns or to offer their own independent objections to how this entire process has actually unfolded, that pattern would instead suggest the opposite conclusion: that this matter remains very much alive, regardless of what any single anonymously sourced newspaper report happens to claim about a private conversation that supposedly took place inside a January consistory most of the wider Catholic world knew almost nothing about until this week. There is a broader pattern worth naming here as well, one that connects this specific January document to everything this channel has already covered extensively regarding Cardinal Roche's own public statements and their reception among the wider Catholic faithful. Roche has, on multiple occasions across recent years, offered a specific and consistent theological justification for the restrictions on the older Mass, one centered on the claim that the theology of the Church has meaningfully changed since the Second Vatican Council, and that the older liturgical form, however venerable and however cherished by those formed within it, no longer adequately expresses that changed theological understanding. This is not a minor or peripheral detail buried somewhere within his public commentary. It has been, across multiple interviews spanning several years now, the actual and consistently stated core of his own justification for maintaining and even tightening restrictions that many bishops, cardinals, and ordinary faithful around the world have found genuinely difficult to reconcile with the Church's own claim to teach a single, unchanging deposit of faith, received once and for all from the Apostles. If the January document that Cardinal Roche personally distributed to the assembled cardinals does in fact reflect and formalize that same underlying theological framework, one built around the specific image of tradition as an ever-changing river rather than as a fixed and stable inheritance, faithfully guarded and handed down intact from one generation to the next, then the question of whether Leo XIV personally authorized and reviewed that text becomes considerably more consequential than a simple matter of internal Vatican bureaucratic procedure. It becomes a genuine and serious question about whether the new pontificate has quietly and without any formal public announcement adopted, as its own settled theological premise, the very specific and contested claim that Catholic doctrine regarding the nature and purpose of the sacred liturgy has itself undergone genuine change over time, rather than simply undergoing organic development, while its essential and unchanging substance remains fully intact and continuous, with everything that came before it. This distinction matters enormously, and it deserves to be stated with real clarity, rather than glossed over or blurred for the sake of narrative convenience. Catholic theology has always permitted and even actively encouraged the organic development of doctrine across time, a process by which the Church comes to understand more fully and articulate more precisely truths that were always genuinely present, even if only implicitly, within the original deposit of faith she received directly from the apostles. This is an entirely different theological claim from the assertion that the Church's actual theology has changed in some more fundamental sense, that what the Church believed and taught in previous centuries no longer adequately corresponds to what she believes and teaches today. The first framework, organic development building faithfully upon what came before, is squarely orthodox and has deep roots in serious Catholic theological reflection, stretching back through figures like Saint Vincent of Lerins and, much later, John Henry Newman. The second framework, an actual change in theology itself, rather than a deepening of understanding regarding truths that remain constant, sits considerably closer to a form of theological relativism that the Church has historically and consistently rejected, across many councils and many centuries, precisely because it would mean the deposit of faith received from the apostles is not genuinely stable and unchanging, but is instead something that can be substantially revised according to the particular theological fashions and preoccupations of any given historical era. Cardinal Roche's own public statements, examined honestly and without any charitable softening, applied purely for the sake of institutional deference, have consistently leaned toward this second and considerably more theologically troubling framework, rather than toward the first and fully orthodox one. When he states plainly that the theology of the Church has changed and that the traditional Mass consequently no longer expresses this supposedly new theology, he is not describing organic doctrinal development in any recognizable theological sense. He is describing an actual and substantive theological rupture, one specifically located at the Second Vatican Council and in the reforms that followed immediately after it. A rupture serious and consequential enough to render an entire liturgical form, celebrated without significant controversy across some 15 centuries of unbroken Catholic worship, no longer fully adequate for expressing the Church's current and supposedly superseding theological self-understanding. This is precisely the underlying claim that Cardinal Sarah's intervention on August 2nd directly and forcefully contradicts. No one, Sarah insists, has the authority to declare that a rite flowing organically from the Church's own centuries-long history simply no longer exists, or that it has somehow become theologically obsolete in this particular way. This is exactly the same underlying claim that Bishop Schneider's Limerick homily contradicts as well, when he insists that preserving the traditional liturgy is inseparable from preserving the deposit of the faith itself, treating the two not as separate and independently negotiable matters, but as fundamentally united and mutually dependent upon one another. The question of whether Leo XIV personally reviewed and authorized the January document, then, is not simply a matter of internal Vatican process or protocol, however that specific question might eventually be resolved through further reporting or through an eventual formal Vatican response. It is a question that goes directly to the theological heart of what this entire pontificate genuinely believes about the nature of Catholic doctrine and its relationship to historical time and change. If the Larazone reconstruction is accurate, and if the Pope genuinely reviewed and personally approved a document built around the specific theological framework Cardinal Roche has publicly articulated on multiple separate occasions, then the four-word phrase attributed to Vatican sources, "He changed nothing," carries a weight considerably heavier than a simple factual claim about one specific piece of internal Vatican paperwork. It would suggest, at minimum, that the theological premises underlying the current restrictions on the traditional Mass now enjoy the personal and considered endorsement of the reigning Pope himself, rather than representing merely one dicastery prefect's own particular institutional position among several genuinely competing perspectives that remain actively contested within the Church's own governing structure. But it must be stated once more, with the same clarity and the same necessary caution offered at the very beginning of this video, that this remains, as matters currently stand, a journalistic reconstruction resting entirely on anonymous sourcing. It has not been formally confirmed by the Vatican. It has not been formally denied by the Vatican either. And the three specific points outlined earlier in this video, the presence or absence of an official denial, the eventual publication or continued informal circulation of the January text itself, and the specific pattern of subsequent cardinal and episcopal reactions in the weeks immediately ahead, together represent the most reliable available path toward determining, with genuine confidence rather than premature speculation, which specific account of these events actually reflects what happened, and more importantly, what it genuinely reveals about where this pontificate currently and actually stands on a question that continues to touch the spiritual lives of a great many faithful Catholics around the entire world. Note these three specific points carefully and return to this same story again in roughly a month's time. It will be the actual observable facts, not any single interpretation offered today, including the interpretation offered throughout this particular video, that will ultimately reveal which reconstruction of these events genuinely proves to be the correct and accurate one. What do you think? Leave a comment below. Amen. God bless you.